His lips were already close to my neck when I whispered those dangerous words. "Keep going!" The sentence escaped before I could stop it, before logic or guilt had time to catch up with desire. The car was parked on a quiet, forgotten road just outside our small town, wrapped in a blanket of fog and dim, orange light from a flickering street lamp above us. The engine was off, but my heartbeat filled the silence louder than any sound ever could. Everything felt amplified in that stillness. The soft rustle of fabric, the warmth of his breath, the slight tremble in my hands as they rested uncertainly against him. My knees pressed awkwardly against the center console as he leaned closer, careful yet undeniably drawn toward me. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice low, cautious, almost hesitant. I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't okay, but I didn't want to be. I wanted this moment more than I wanted clarity, more than I wanted safety. And maybe that was the first real sign that something inside me had already broken long before tonight. My name is Alina Carter. I'm 42 years old. I've been married for 18 years. I have a son in college, a life that looks stable from the outside, and a reputation in a town where everyone knows your name before they know your story. And yet, I had never felt more invisible. Not until him, Adam. He was 23, my son's best friend growing up. A boy who used to run through our backyard with muddy shoes and loud laughter, who called me Mrs. Carter with innocent respect, who sat at our breakfast table like he belonged there. But time changes people. And somewhere along the way, it changed me too. Because the way he looked at me now, it wasn't the way a boy looks at someone familiar. It was the way a man looks at a woman he truly sees. And that was something I hadn't felt in years. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything shifted. No dramatic confession. No sudden decision. It started quietly, almost invisibly, the way most dangerous things do. It had been over a year since I last saw him when he knocked on our door again. I remember opening it and freezing for just a second. He looked different, taller, broader, his features sharper, his presence heavier somehow. Not just physically, but emotionally, like life had already tested him and left its mark. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," he said, smiling slightly. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, kept it light. But instead, I said something else. "You're impossible to forget." The words slipped out before I could soften them, and I quickly laughed to cover it up, pretending it was nothing more than polite conversation. But it wasn't, and something in his eyes told me he knew that. After that, he started coming by more often. At first, it was just work, helping with the yard, fixing small things around the house, offering to do things we didn't even ask for. He said he owed us. I didn't question it, because truthfully, I didn't want to. There was something comforting about his presence, not loud or overwhelming, just steady, alive. Something my house had quietly stopped feeling like a long time ago. My husband, Brian, had always been a good man, responsible, reliable, predictable. But somewhere along the years, predictable had turned into distant. We stopped noticing each other, stopped really talking, stopped seeing. By the 13th year of our marriage, something subtle had already faded. Conversations became routine. Names became habits. Even affection felt scheduled rather than felt. There were no big fights, no dramatic betrayals, just slow, quiet erosion. And one day, you realize the person sitting across from you feels more like a stranger than a partner. Adam noticed things, small things, the way I liked my coffee, the way I organized the kitchen, the way I paused before answering certain questions. He listened, really listened, and I didn't realize how starved I was for that until it started happening. Our conversations became longer, deeper. He would linger after finishing work, sitting on the porch steps, wiping sweat from his forehead while asking me about my day like it actually mattered. And I would stand there, longer than I should have, answering, smiling, feeling something I couldn't quite name yet. The first time something shifted, truly shifted, was so small it could have been ignored. A simple touch. We were in the hallway near the mudroom. He walked past me, and his fingers brushed lightly against my lower back. That was it, nothing more. But my entire body reacted like it had been struck by lightning. I froze, completely still. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge it, just kept walking like it meant nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. Not to me, because for the first time in years, I felt something. After that, everything changed, without changing at all. Longer eye contact, quieter conversations, messages that felt harmless on the surface, but carried something deeper underneath. One night, he texted me, "Do you ever feel like nobody really sees you anymore?" I stared at that message for 10 minutes, because the answer was immediate. Yes, every single day, but saying it felt like admitting something I had buried for years. Eventually, I replied, yes. That one word opened a door I didn't know how to close again. He started calling me Alina after that. Not Mrs. Carter, not ma'am, just Alina. And somehow, hearing my name like that felt different, like I belonged to myself again. I started noticing myself too, fixing my hair before going outside, putting on lip balm, choosing what to wear, even on days that didn't matter. Little things I hadn't cared about in years. And that scared me, because it meant something inside me was waking up. The night everything truly changed. The line we had been dancing around for weeks finally blurred. Brian had left town for the weekend. A simple trip, nothing unusual. But the moment his car disappeared down the street, something inside me shifted. A release, a quiet, dangerous freedom. It started raining that night. Not heavily, just a steady, soft drizzle that filled the air with a kind of tension. At 9 p.m., I got a message. Garage is flooding. Mind if I check the gutters? It was a ridiculous excuse. We both knew it. Still, I replied, keys are under the ceramic frog. When he walked in, the house felt different. Too quiet, too aware. We didn't greet each other right away. Didn't say anything. Just existed in the same space, both pretending we didn't know exactly why he was there. But silence can only hold so much before something breaks. And when it did, there was no going back. That's how I ended up in that car, in that moment, with his breath against my skin. And my world balanced on the edge of something irreversible. I knew what this meant. I knew what people would say. I knew what I stood to lose. But none of that felt as real as the way he looked at me. Like I mattered. Like I was still alive. And in that moment, that was enough. I drove home later that night in complete silence. Parked the car, walked inside. Everything looked exactly the same. But I wasn't. Something inside me had shifted permanently. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I had already crossed the line. And there was no returning to the woman I used to be. There is a very specific kind of change that doesn't announce itself with actions, but with awareness. A quiet understanding that something is no longer innocent, even if nothing obvious has happened yet. That's where we were. Balanced carefully on a line neither of us acknowledged out loud, but both of us could feel with absolute clarity. After that message, do you ever feel like nobody really sees you anymore? Something between Adam and me shifted permanently. It wasn't just conversation anymore. It wasn't just familiarity or comfort. It was recognition. And recognition, I learned, can be far more dangerous than desire. Because desire can be denied. Recognition cannot. After that night, our interactions became quieter but heavier. Every word carried weight. Every glance lingered just a second longer than it should have. We never said anything inappropriate. Not directly. But everything meant something. He started showing up a little earlier in the mornings. Earlier than necessary. Earlier than any job required. And I started adjusting my routine without admitting it to myself. Waking up sooner. Taking a little more time getting ready. Brushing my hair twice instead of once. Small things. Meaningless things. Except they weren't meaningless at all. One morning, I found him already in the garage when I walked in with 2 cups of coffee. I didn't hear you come in, I said, handing him one of the mugs. You were thinking about something, he replied. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I gave a small laugh, the kind I used when I didn't want to answer honestly. Am I that obvious? Only to someone paying attention, he said. And then he took a sip of his coffee. Like he hadn't just said something that made my chest tighten. That was the thing about Adam. He didn't push. He didn't cross obvious lines. He simply noticed. And being noticed like that, it changes you. We started talking about things that had nothing to do with daily life. Not just surface-level conversations, but real ones. The kind that slowly peel back layers you didn't realize you had buried. He asked me if I ever missed who I used to be. I asked him if he was happy with the life he was building. Sometimes we didn't even realize how much time had passed until the sun had shifted completely in the sky. And every time we talked, I felt something inside me come alive again. That should have been enough of a warning. It wasn't. The physical distance between us began to shrink in ways that were almost impossible to point out. If someone had been watching, standing a little closer than necessary, brushing past each other without apologizing, hands lingering just a fraction of a second too long when passing something. It was subtle, but it was deliberate. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen repotting plants he had brought over. The counter was a mess of soil, broken ceramic pieces, and tangled roots. Careful, he said softly as he reached across me. His hand closed around mine to guide it, not roughly, not forcefully, just enough to redirect the small tool I was holding. He didn't let go immediately. Neither did I. For a moment, the world went completely still. No sound, no movement, just the feeling of his hand over mine. When I finally looked up at him, he was already looking at me. Not surprised, not unsure, certain. That was new and terrifying, because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening between us. And worse, so did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Brian, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, staring at the ceiling while my mind replayed that moment over and over again. It hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't been wrong in any obvious way. But it hadn't been innocent either. And that difference mattered. The next few days felt different. Charged, like the air before a storm. We became more careful in obvious ways. More distance when we were around other people. More formal in our tone when there was even the slightest chance someone could hear us. But when we were alone, the silence between us became louder than words. Late one evening, I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch television. The house was quiet. Brian already asleep upstairs. My phone buzzed. "Adam, you seemed quiet today." I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Just tired." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "Or maybe you're just saving your words for the right person?" My breath caught. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't, because that message wasn't casual. It wasn't harmless. It was direct. And for the first time, I had to make a choice. Ignore it, deflect it, or acknowledge it. 30 minutes passed before I finally typed back. "Maybe I am." The moment I sent it, I knew. There was no pretending anymore. We had crossed something. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, completely. After that, everything accelerated without either of us openly pushing it forward. He didn't send another message that night. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. The next time I saw him, we didn't mention it. Not a single word about that conversation. But the way he looked at me had changed. And the way I looked back had changed too. A few days later, I found him in the garage again. It had just rained, the scent of wet pavement mixing with the faint smell of gasoline. He was working on the lawnmower, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with grease. "You always know how to fix things," I said, leaning lightly against the door frame. "Not always," he replied, not looking up. "Sometimes I make things worse." There was something in the way he said it, something intentional. When he finally looked at me, I felt it immediately. That same tension, that same unspoken awareness. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My heart started beating faster. "Of course." He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. "Do you ever feel like you missed something?" he asked. "Like the one thing that makes people feel alive." The question hit deeper than it should have, because the answer was immediate. Yes, every single day. But I didn't say it out loud. I just looked at him. And he looked back at me. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. That was the moment. The exact moment where everything could have changed. Where one step forward, one small movement, would have erased the last remaining boundary between us. But we didn't move. We just stood there, breathing the same air, feeling the same pull, pretending we still had control. Later that night, I sat alone in the dark, holding my phone in my hands. Another message. "I keep thinking about your hands." My chest tightened as I read it. I started typing. "I keep thinking about your eyes." Delete. "I think we should stop." Delete. My fingers hovered over the screen for a long time. Then I typed the only honest thing left. "I feel the same way." And I sent it. The moment the message delivered, everything changed. Not on the outside. The house was still quiet. The world was still exactly the same. But inside me, something had shifted completely. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. Because for the first time, I wasn't just standing near the line. I had stepped over it, and there was no going back anymore. There are moments in life when you can still turn back. Moments where the choice is still yours. Where nothing irreversible has happened yet. Where you can step away, close the door, and pretend none of it ever existed. And then there are moments where that choice disappears. Not because someone forces it away from you, but because you let it go. That's what that night became for me. The point of no return. It started quietly, almost deceptively normal. Brian stood in the driveway that afternoon, adjusting his watch, talking about his weekend trip, like it was something important. Charleston. A reunion. Old friends. The kind of event that sounded more like an obligation than excitement. I stood there nodding, smiling in the right places, playing my role perfectly. "Back Sunday evening," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Drive safe," I replied softly. And I meant it. That was the strange part. I wasn't angry at him. I wasn't trying to hurt him. There was no dramatic resentment fueling what was about to happen. Just emptiness. and something else beginning to grow in its place. I watched his car disappear down the street, the red glow of his taillights fading into the distance. And the moment they vanished, I exhaled. A long, slow breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. It wasn't relief. It wasn't excitement. It was something in between, like a door inside me had quietly unlocked. The house felt different immediately, quieter, but not in the usual heavy way. This silence felt expectant, like something was about to happen. The rain started sometime after sunset, a soft, steady drizzle that coated the windows in a thin layer of moving shadows, the kind of rain that doesn't storm or demand attention, but lingers. I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, a glass of wine resting untouched in my hand. The television was on, but I wasn't watching it. I was waiting. I didn't admit that to myself, but I was. At exactly 9:03, my phone buzzed. Adam, garage is flooding. Mind if I check the gutters? I stared at the message, and despite everything, I smiled. It was a terrible excuse, a ridiculous one. We both knew it, and still my fingers moved across the screen. Keys are under the ceramic frog. You know which one. I hit send before I could think twice. The next few minutes stretched longer than they should have. Every small sound in the house felt amplified. The ticking clock in the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the rain tapping steadily against the glass. Then, the soft click of the back door opening. He didn't call out, didn't announce himself, and I didn't go to meet him. We stayed in separate parts of the house for a few moments that felt heavier than anything we had experienced before. Like we were both gathering the courage to step into something we already understood. I finally stood up. At some point, I had taken off my sweater without even realizing it. I was left in a thin top that suddenly felt much lighter than it should have. My bare feet made almost no sound against the floor as I moved toward the kitchen. He was standing near the counter, water droplets still clinging to his hair and the shoulders of his shirt. The rain had followed him inside in small, scattered traces. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other. No polite smiles, no casual conversation, just awareness. You didn't check the gutters, I said quietly. No, he replied. His honesty didn't shock me. It grounded me, because it meant we were no longer pretending. The distance between us felt too small and too large at the same time. One step could close it, or end it. Adam, I started, but the words didn't come. Because what was I supposed to say? Stop? Leave? This is wrong? All of those things were true. And yet none of them felt real in that moment. He took a slow step closer. Not rushed. Not forceful. Careful. Like he was giving me time to move away if I wanted to. I didn't move. That was my answer. His hand lifted slightly, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before brushing against my arm. The contact was light. Barely there. But it sent a shock through me that made it impossible to think clearly. You can tell me to go, he said softly. His voice wasn't confident this time. It carried something new. Uncertainty. That mattered more than anything, because it reminded me of one simple truth. This wasn't something happening to me. It was something I was choosing. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as my son's friend. Not as the boy who used to sit at our kitchen table. But as the man standing in front of me now. And I realized something that both terrified and thrilled me. I didn't want him to leave. Stay, I whispered. The word felt heavier than anything I had said in years. And once it was spoken, there was no taking it back. The space between us disappeared after that. Not all at once, but steadily. I felt his hand move from my arm to my waist, pulling me just slightly closer. My breath caught, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. Everything felt sharper, louder, closer. The rain, the silence, the sound of my own heartbeat. Are you okay? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway, because what I felt in that moment wasn't about being okay. It was about feeling something again. Anything. And he understood that. I could see it in his eyes. The hesitation faded, replaced by something more certain, more intense. When he leaned in, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was careful, like he was still giving me time to stop him. I didn't. And when that final distance disappeared, everything else did too. The house, the rules, the years of silence and routine and emptiness, all of it faded into the background. There was only the moment. Only the feeling, only the undeniable truth that I had crossed into something I could never undo. Time became impossible to measure after that. Minutes blurred into something longer, deeper. Every thought I should have had didn't come. Every reason to stop disappeared. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about tomorrow. I was only thinking about how alive I felt. And that was the most dangerous part of all. Because it meant I wasn't just making a mistake. I was embracing it. At some point, reality began to return in small, quiet pieces. The clock, the stillness of the house, the awareness of where I was. What I had done. I pulled back slightly, my breath unsteady, my thoughts finally starting to catch up with me. We shouldn't. I started, but the sentence didn't finish, because even as I said it, I knew it didn't matter. That line had already been crossed. There was no should anymore, only what was. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me otherwise. He just looked at me, and in that look, I saw the same realization reflected back. We both knew. Everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Later that night, I stood alone in the hallway, listening to the silence that had returned to the house. But it didn't feel the same. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of something I didn't fully understand yet. Something complicated. Something dangerous. Something real. I went upstairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the bedroom, I paused at the door. This room, this life, everything in it suddenly felt different. Like I was looking at it from the outside. I stepped inside anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. But as I lay down in that familiar bed, staring into the darkness, one truth settled firmly in my mind. I wasn't the same woman anymore. Not the one who had waved goodbye in the driveway earlier that day. Not the one who had spent years quietly disappearing into routine and silence. That version of me was gone, and in her place was someone I didn't fully recognize yet. Someone who had made a choice she couldn't undo, and who would have to live with everything that came after. The morning after doesn't arrive with forgiveness. It doesn't soften what happened or wrap it in understanding. It simply shows up quiet and unforgiving, placing reality back into your hands, whether you're ready for it or not. I woke up before the sun had fully risen. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. The ceiling above me, the soft weight of the blanket, the faint gray light slipping through the curtains. And then it came back, all of it. Not in pieces, not slowly, but all at once. The memory of his voice, the way I had said stay, the way I hadn't stopped. I closed my eyes again, as if that might push it away, but it didn't. Because this wasn't something outside of me anymore. It was part of me now. I sat up slowly, pressing my hands against my face, trying to steady my breathing. The house was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts louder than anything else. For a long time, I just sat there, not crying, not panicking, just aware. Because the truth is, regret didn't come the way I expected it to. There was no immediate wave of guilt crashing over me. There was something else first. Clarity. A sharp, uncomfortable clarity about my life, my marriage, and the version of myself I had been living as for years. And that frightened me more than anything. I got out of bed and walked downstairs, each step feeling heavier than it should. The kitchen looked exactly the same. Clean counters, organized mail, everything in its place. But I wasn't the same person standing in it anymore. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand slightly unsteady. My reflection in the window caught my attention for a moment. I looked awake, not rested, not peaceful, but awake in a way I hadn't been in years. And that realization came with a quiet, unsettling question. What does that say about my life? I didn't have time to answer it, because my phone buzzed. I froze. I already knew who it was before I even looked. Adam. The name alone was enough to send a wave of emotion through me. Confusion, warmth, fear, something deeper I didn't want to name. I picked up the phone, staring at the message. Are you okay? 3 simple words, but they carried everything. Concern, uncertainty, and something else. Something that mirrored exactly what I was feeling. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't know how to answer that question. Was I okay? No. Yes. Both. Neither. I set the phone down without replying. Not because I wanted to ignore him, but because I needed to understand myself first. Hours passed slowly. I tried to move through my routine, making coffee, straightening things that were already straight, keeping my hands busy so my mind wouldn't spiral. But it didn't work, because every quiet moment pulled me back to the same place. To him, to us, to what had happened, and to what it meant. By the afternoon, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I picked up my phone again. The message was still there, waiting, just like everything else. I typed slowly. I don't know. It was the only honest answer I had. The reply came faster than I expected. Me neither. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. There was something strangely comforting about that. Not because it made things easier, but because it meant I wasn't alone in the confusion. Still, comfort didn't change reality. Brian would be home tomorrow. My life, the one I had built, maintained, protected for years, was still there, waiting for me to step back into it. And now I had to decide what that meant. The rest of the day passed in a blur of thoughts I couldn't fully organize. I thought about my marriage, not just the last night, not just the emptiness, but everything. The years we had spent together, the quiet routines, the moments that used to mean something. When did we stop trying? When did I stop asking for more? Or had I ever asked at all? That question lingered longer than the others, because it forced me to confront something I hadn't wanted to admit. I had allowed my life to become smaller, safer, quieter, and in doing that, I had slowly disappeared inside it. What happened with Adam didn't create that emptiness. It revealed it, and that truth was impossible to ignore. As evening approached, the house began to feel heavier again. Not empty this time, but filled with decisions I wasn't ready to make. My phone buzzed once more. "I don't regret it," Adam wrote. My heart tightened. I read the message twice, 3 times, because I needed to be sure I understood it correctly. It wasn't careless. It wasn't impulsive. It was certain. And that made everything harder, because I didn't regret it either. That was the part no one prepares you for. The part that doesn't fit into simple ideas of right and wrong. I knew what we did was complicated. I knew the consequences could be devastating. But regret? It wasn't there. Not in the way I thought it would be. And that realization scared me more than anything else. I typed slowly, choosing each word carefully. Neither do I, and that's the problem. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. What do we do now? I stared at the question, because that was it. The question everything had been leading to. And there was no easy answer. There were only choices. Hard ones, real ones. The kind that don't just affect one moment, but everything that comes after. I set the phone down again, walked to the window. The sky outside had darkened, the last light of day fading into something deeper, quieter. I rested my hand against the glass, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingertips. For years, my life had been predictable, safe, defined. Now it wasn't, and maybe that was the most honest thing about all of this. Not the mistake, not the secrecy, but the fact that something inside me had finally woken up. The question was, what was I going to do with that? Behind me, the house remained still, unchanged, but I knew better now. Because change doesn't always show itself in the things around you. Sometimes it lives entirely within you, and once it begins, it doesn't stop. I picked up my phone one last time that night, looked at his question again. What do we do now? My fingers hovered over the screen. Then slowly I typed, "We decide who we want to be," and live with it. I didn't know if that was the right answer. I didn't know if there even was a right answer, but it was the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hiding from the truth anymore. No matter where it would lead me next,